Well, Nathan, how are you anyway? Good. I'm all right too. How's school? Good. Okay. Getting up and going every day? That's good. Now they'd miss you if you weren't there. They'd come looking for you.
Hey, Aaron. Children are well trained. Just takes a look at emotions.
Well, the boy. Oh, I really like my little book, but
Well, it must be it must be okay. I only know there's an update.
see that when I can hear it, when they first had the beat.
Got something about all these information going upstairs.
Oh, really? They're so tasteful.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not get too late.
Hey, Scott, Chris, how are you anyway? Now, you're still doing computer things and tearing them up?
Good.
I'm Rick McGuire and that stuff. But oh, that's recent. Well, I'm glad there's people like you.
Thanks, Mom. I'd love to help you. Go.
You'll be happy to know you can kill me. Anyway,
You know, that computer science when I was in college really didn't exist as a degree. I think they had something, but it wasn't quite accepted. So, yeah, I just kind of, it's actually kind of a career that fell into me. More than anything else, I just came out that job. My degree is which is completely the opposite.
I know. I thought you were gonna like run out of the house and like go over the road.
Would you try to do it? Because I don't feel like you can. As soon as I said it, I was like, so I left it.
Like Saturday, I was working, so I tried to listen to the ball game on the radio. It seemed like extra stuff was until it's but I'm not quite sure which way it was going to go. No, it seemed like the fourth quarter started there, and they had a couple of miscues that we just were able to capitalize on immediately, and all of a sudden it was just flowing. By the end of the score, you wouldn't know what the first three quarters were like. So what do they got next? Is that here or there? That's okay, though. I mean, those are the ones you want. That's where you want to gauge yourself going toward the postseason there. Where are you staying? But it was only, yeah, it was like 13 to 11. Yeah, at like the end of the fourth quarter, and then fourth quarter was just.
Hi, David. How are you? Good. How are you? Well, I have to get out of Jack. School sits there
I don't think you want to hear that.
You know, but you know what? I don't as long as the officials are going to the coaches at the start of the game and saying, hey, kind of that, this is what we're going to call. Don't let a celebration like that draw. Just make it look worse this way.
Hi, Simon.
Now, when I'm tuned in,
Is Michael out on the big truck? Yeah.
Oh, I hate that. I know. That's the thing, is, everybody is part of it. We got now the pressure's on. I think.
Day by day.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Good. So look, hey Bob, it's a little custom detail. Yep.
Whatever. Say, push that way. Thank you.
I got it mostly there, but I don't
That's awesome.
Hey, Chad. Okay. Work this day. Did you heard anything from Paul?
Good evening. Let's stand and worship. What's wrong with that note? Hang on. Yeah, okay, it's just my fingers. It's still my fingers. There we go.
Thank
Friday night. I think football's kind of over by then. I was going to have a Halloween party at my house. That's 411 South Michigan. Some of you have been there. I was going to have a bonfire, some games. I want you guys to dress up. I'll be dressed up so you guys can or you don't have to. I think it would be fun. So, parents, teens, whoever, let me know if you're coming. Just as soon as you know. And it'll be fun. That's all I got. I'll post on the page.
Okay, so I get to tell you about some things that have already happened and one thing that hasn't happened yet. So we'll start with the already happened. Just to kind of share in the fun and joy, we have shared with you before about the mission team, which is really just eyes and ears that are looking for ways to love people through money or time or whatever. And anyone is welcome to be a part of that. It's not like a secret society or anything. There's a Facebook group that basically is just for communication. It's not like it's the elite people or anything. So if you want to be a part of that, you can. Or if you see something, you don't really want to be on the team because you don't want like your lifetime commitment there, but you see something that a way you feel like you could love people, just let one of us know that you know is on the team. Anyway, so a few things that we've done. These are like 4 things out of 1 million or 20 that we've done recently. And I just want to show you because it's really fun. And Nathan, if you could put up the one that's called Trailer. So David Berkebile and our nurse Dana Miller from South School and I went to this trailer. And that's not really police tape. They had decorated for Halloween. I was really scared at first because I thought it was. But these 2 girls come running out the door. Nurse Dana! They're attacking her with hugs. And it's literally like a block, 2 blocks maybe that way, and a block that way. We could like walk there in 30 seconds. And so that's where the trailer is, right by the Cherry Street Apartments. They have not had hot water, like ever. And so the girls haven't been taking baths. They don't get clean clothes. Which another thing is we're helping South School get a washer and dryer at the school so that Dana can help with other kids who have that problem. But that's a total other story. But anyway, so David went back a hallway and I told Dana, I feel like we're going to be on a documentary on Netflix. But anyway, so that's not very nice. He went back a hallway and I was frightened because it was dark, but he was fine. And he looked at the situation and it was bad. And so the guy that was there thought he could put the hot water heater in. So we're hopeful that that will give him some confidence too. Like he was really seemed excited to help the people. He was a friend of theirs. So anyway, we bought them a hot water heater and other things they would need, which I have no idea what they are, but David did, and took it to them. So we are hopeful that they will now have hot water with that hot water heater. So that's that, and it's happening like right there. So when we were, this is way longer than I meant it for it to be, but it's fun. When we were talking to the guy, the nurse was like, I'm the nurse at the school, and I said, and we go to a church and we just like to love people by giving them hot water. And he sort of looked at me like we were weird, but that's okay. So that's that one. And then go to, I don't even remember what else, Stove. Is there one called Stove? So a house of, she wouldn't mind if I tell you, Carmen DeVore's house. Her stove literally blew up and she's without a job right now. So David and his dad, I think, and your dad, right, installed that for her and she was just thrilled. And then if you go to Sidewalk, also at her house, Bob and his posse put in a brand new concrete steps and sidewalk. Hers was literally crumbling underneath her feet and she could not have been more thrilled. So loving her through sidewalks and stoves. And then what's the other one?
She was so excited that we were there. I mean, she came out and helped us load all of the bricks and, tried to do all she could to help us.
I love
It
that.
was really neat.
Love that. Go ahead and do whatever the other one is. I can't remember. Oh, and then some of you, is there a gift card one? Go ahead and put that one up. Some of you may have known of that Josh Orman fell off a roof, and so his family was blessed with a bunch of gift cards because they're going to need to eat fast food a lot. And what's the other one, bud?
Scooter.
Oh, Scooter, yeah, put that one up. So a friend of Brenda Bender's who has so many health problems she can't even get to the next one because the one before can't get, her teeth are affecting whether she can have a surgery, and it's just really, really unbearable for her, and she hasn't been able to get around. So with the help of the vendors and the Grace Project, got her a scooter, and she is out of her mind excited with her little scooter. So just some kind of fun things that are happening, and that stuff can happen all the time. If, like I said, if you are aware of something, just do it, or call someone if you don't feel like it. But it's fun when you do it because you get to see their faces, and it's just more fun for you really than it is them. So that is that, and I'll stop there. How about next Sunday, out in our yard, worship is going to be a meal. Remember when I was sharing from Zeteo how the kids had the idea of how, what could we do in communion to really experience communion as Jesus intended? And that we discovered, or they discovered in the midst of that study, that in the early church, communion was part of a meal. It wasn't just, oh, let's stop singing for a minute and take a little bread and shot glass. It was part of their meal they were sharing. And so next week for worship, it's not like we're going to have a dinner and then worship. It's like the dinner is our worship next week. So it still starts at 6. We're going to have hot dogs and s'mores and drinks we will provide, and you can provide any sides. You can bring desserts if you don't like s'mores too, but we'll have that. And bring a lawn chair if you want, although we'll have chairs and tables set up outside. And so we're going to worship by eating together next week. So bring a friend, 6 o'clock. That is that. Is that everything? Okay, thank you. And now greet each other, love each other. Bye.
Go ahead and turn and love on each other. Stand up, move around.
Good, how are
Thank you for this time of worship. I thank you for this time when we can gather in praise of you and in thanks for what you have done in our lives. God, I thank you that even when we contemplate who you are, what you've done, and we try to give voice to that, it still only scratches the surface of all of who you are and of all of what you're doing in our lives. So God, I pray that you continue to work in us, that you continue to change us, that you continue to make us into your image, that when we leave this place, we'll be just a bit different, and maybe even a lot different than what we were when we came in. By the power of your Spirit, by the power of your Word, by the power of your presence in our lives. Lord, we ask you to do that in Jesus' name. Amen. You can go ahead and be seated. Go ahead and turn in your Bibles to could you, hey, Sydney? Yeah, you. One of those channels there.
I got you, brother.
You got me? Okay. Watch what he does, just so you're ready the next time. Okay? Watch what he does. All right. Because there is. Because I do not have a booming voice. So I got to work with what God gave me. This is about it. So, all right. Go ahead and turn your Bibles to Acts chapter 26. Hey, just next week when we do a thing, if you and Jennifer and I had a quick little powwow. If you want to bring your lawn chairs, that's fine. Because we're gonna have a fire going. We'll have hot dogs cooked, but we'll also have some not cooked if you want to cook them over the fire. We figured that wouldn't work if like 60 people all try to do that at once. But we figured 6 or 7 brave souls might want to do that. So bring your lawn chairs if you want. But we're gonna have tables and stuff set up, and we want you to kind of sit around those tables. So when we take communion, you're with your table. And then we're going to do some other things in those groups and in those tables, praying for each other and whatnot, and caring for each other. So, so if you bring your lawn chair, I don't want you to set up in the corner and just sit there and don't leave that spot. That will break my heart. Okay, so you can set it up, but then you got to sit at the table when you eat. Okay, you just got to do it, or else it's like a sin. So anyway, all right, Acts 26, 1 through 29 is where we're going to be. The last couple weeks, in the last couple weeks, month or so, I've done a couple of weddings, and I've done a number of weddings over the years. And I enjoy weddings. I enjoy the counseling that leads up to the weddings. I enjoy the conversations. I enjoy doing the ceremony and just kind of that being a special time. And we had one just this weekend. Jennifer's cousin got married, and I got to do his wedding, which was a lot of fun. And I remember when he was just a little bitty guy, he was obnoxious. He was such an obnoxious kid. In fact, when Ezra is at his worst, we look at each other and we're like, oh my gosh, he's so much like Hal. And that was the guy who got married. So, but one thing that when I do a wedding, I typically have like a little sermonette in there. I mean, I don't preach too long because we got other things on the brain when there's a wedding around, so we want to get out of there. But I usually talk for, 8-10 minutes, something like that. Try to communicate some meaning into what is taking place. And I've always enjoyed that. But the last couple of times, what I've started doing is, I have like these different wedding sermons, and sometimes I've reused and whatnot. Sometimes I write a new one. But in the last couple of times, I have started injecting some personal stories into them to try to be a vehicle for bringing home the point, a vehicle for helping them hear the truth that I want them to hear. And so, when I talk to them in the last couple of ways, when I've talked to them about the need to be selfless in your relationship, and I told them yesterday, I said, one of the career hazards that I have is that I'm a preacher. And so much of my job is I stand up and talk and people sit there and listen. And you get a few years of that in your system, and you start to think, hey, life consists of me talking and people listening. That's just the way life goes. And which you can start to get a little high opinion of yourself if that happens. But God doesn't want me to think of myself that way, so he has sent a messenger from him into my life that helps keep me straight in that department, and that is my wife. She makes it very clear that life is not about me talking and her listening, and that, or even other people listening, that it's not all about me. And I need to hear that. I shared with them yesterday that Jennifer, one of Jennifer's struggles is she is an only child. And I have said before, there should be support groups for spouses of only children. They bring a special skill set into the relationship. They don't know what it's like to figure out who gets how many donuts out of a box. They don't know what it's like to fight for that extra piece of toast or that extra piece of chicken. They don't know what it's like, right? I mean, her philosophy was, if you run out of toast, just make more. If you need more chicken, just go get some more. It's just, that's the way life is. And, and so we function differently. And sometimes while she is 98% wonderful, every once in a while that 2% flares up. The 2% flares up.
Right now.
I know, right? Every once in a while that 2% will flare up. And she will, and that only child part will flare up. And she becomes a not as good version of herself. And God sent a messenger into her life to help her realize it's not all about her. And that was me. She sent me into her life. And so I'm telling them these stories. And I told Hal yesterday, I said, when you're in a fight and you go to apologize, I said, and when you're talking through that fight, and if you get to the point in the fight where she looks you in the eye and says, you're right, you're always right. While that might look good on paper, that is not a good place. That is not a good place, and you need to do some fixing at that point because you're in a dangerous spot. And so I was able to share that with him. And a couple weeks ago when I did Trey and Cassie Carpenter's wedding, when I talked about the need for forgiveness when there's conflict in the marriage, that week actually, just like a couple days before the wedding, Jennifer and I had a knockdown drag out. So me being who I was like. So, for instance, this week, when Jennifer and I didn't give them all the hairy details, but, I shared with them, we had gotten in a fight that week, and I kind of laid it out just a little bit, and as I'm saying this, she had been small talking with a couple that was sitting next to her in the back, and as I'm talking, the dude kind of leans over, he's like, isn't that convenient you guys got in a fight this week so he could tell about that? And she's like, yeah, that's real convenient. So anyway, but the fun thing is that becomes a vehicle for them to hear what God wants to say to them. In fact, yesterday, one of her other cousins, his girlfriend came up to me afterwards. She said, I really appreciated the stories you told. That helped me. And when we share those stories, God uses those as a vehicle for us to hear his truth into our lives. So with Emma, what's your story? What's your story? What has God done in your life that is unique, that is special? Because he's doing something different. He's doing something different and unique in each one of us. And it's a special story in and of itself. And so the question is, what is your story? Because sometimes we can get in the mindset of there's nothing really significant going on with my story. My story's not too special. My story is, I grew up in the church, and I didn't really do too much. I remember when I did my background check with the Bureau of Prisons, they asked me, have you ever stolen anything? And the two things that came to my mind was, when I was like 7, I stole a Sunkist out of the grocery store, but it was an accident, and I realized it, and I took it back right away. And then one time I stole a couple of stamps out of Janet Carpenter's desk at the church to pay some bills, and I never paid it back. And so anyway, that was the only thing that came to mind. So I told her, and I know that guy was looking at me, and he was looking at me thinking, is this dude for real? And I was like, that's like the only thing I remember, Well, some of my coworkers were like, they didn't do so well when they were asked the question, did you smoke pot? They didn't do so well with that question. And so, some of us, our story is, might not think it's that exciting. Or we might think our story is so way out there that nobody could relate to it. That might be the case as well. That your story is okay, God really broke the mold when he made me. And so no one's going to be able to relate to what I've got going on. And yet, God has given each of us a unique story, and he can use that story to make a difference in the lives of others if we'll only let him. And I think we see that here in this here in this passage we're going to look at today, this chapter really. So let's take a look at it. We're going to read almost all of Acts chapter 26, okay? Acts 26, 1 through 29 is what we're going to look at. Okay, so we have fast forwarded a little bit. Just where we were at 2 weeks ago was, I think we were in Acts chapter 20, and Paul was in Ephesus. And, that's when there was the greatest Artemis of the Ephesians, and they had the whole conflict and everything like that, and because Ephesus had been turned upside down by the gospel. And that's where he was a couple weeks ago, okay, when we talked. And he's in the third missionary journey at that point. Well, if you follow that, what takes place between what we were talking about 2 weeks ago and what is going on right now is Paul, at the end of that third missionary journey, ends up back in Jerusalem. And when he is back in Jerusalem, he goes into the temple. And there were some Jews there that just really were ticked off at him because of what he was doing, going to the Gentiles, ministering to them and whatnot. And so they kind of trumped up some charges and they whipped the mob into the crowd into a frenzy, to a mob almost. And they wanted to lynch him right there. And basically the Roman soldiers pull him out, and he asks to speak to the crowd. Paul, he just thinks that's what people are. He talks, they listen, And so he talks to the crowd, and it doesn't go so well. And so he ends up getting arrested, and basically he's kept locked up for a while. And all these charges are brought before him, and they're kind of trumped up charges. And he responds to them, but at some point and he kind of gets bounced around from authority to authority. But at some point in the process, because it looks like the Jews are gonna, they're wanting to get him moved to another location, and for the purpose of assassinating him. And he knows that's what's going to happen, and so he doesn't obviously want to die. So he basically, what he does is he appeals to Caesar, and as a Roman citizen, that is his right. Any Roman citizen could appeal to Caesar, and if you appeal to Caesar you will go. And there's no telling how long until you get to talk to Caesar, but you're on your way. And he threw down that trump card and said, "That's what I want." And so at that point he was like in productive custody basically. So at this point where we are is in the previous chapter he had been locked up basically for 2 years. The governor Felix had heard, would talk to Paul, talk to him what's going on with him, but basically he didn't do anything. He just kind of kept him on ice for 2 years. Well, Felix had passed away, and now there was a new governor named Festus, and not the guy on the Addams Family, just so you know, a different Festus. But anyway, and he wanted to get him out of there. He wanted to get him on his way to Rome, but he needed to kind of, he would have to send like a letter along with to explain this is what's going on with this guy. This is why he wants to meet with you. This is why he wants to be on trial before you, O Caesar. And he's not really sure what to write. Felix didn't really leave him any paperwork. And so he's going to meet with Paul to find out what's going on here. And at that time, Herod Agrippa II, who was like the king of the Jewish people, the Roman designated king of the Jewish people, was in town with his sister Bernice. And Festus had the idea, hey, you sit in with this because you might be able to kind of make sense of this a little bit better than me. And so you kind of have, Festus is the Roman governor, and Herod Agrippa II is kind of the king of the Jews. It's kind of like when you're dealing with state authorities and city authorities and county authorities and federal authority. There's kind of an overlapping of power, so to speak. That's what you got going on here, okay? Festus is probably more of the higher authority at this point, but Agrippa is specifically responsible for the Jewish people and the areas where the Jewish people are in high concentration. And so he's going to sit in on this. And so at this point, what we have is Paul has come in and he's going to talk to these two guys, well, three people really, because Bernice is in there with him. And he's going to give his defense of why he's going to Rome. But as we're going to see, he does a little bit more than just give a defense. So let's take a look at it. It says this. Agrippa says to Paul, "You have permission to speak for yourself." And then Paul stretched out his hand and began to defend himself. "I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa, I am to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews, because you are especially familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore, I beg of you to listen to me patiently. All the Jews know my way of life from my youth, a life spent from the beginning among my own people and in Jerusalem. They have known for a long time, if they are willing to testify, that I have belonged to the strictest sect of our religion and lived as a Pharisee. And now I stand here on trial on account of my hope in the promise made by God to our ancestors, a promise that our 12 tribes hope to attain as they earnestly worship day and night. It is for this hope, Your Excellency, that I am accused by Jews. Why is it thought incredible by any of you that God raises the dead? Indeed, I myself was convinced that I ought to do many things against the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And that is what I did in Jerusalem. With authority received from the chief priests, I not only locked up many of the saints in prison, but I also cast my vote against them when they were being condemned to death. By punishing them often in all the synagogues, I tried to force them to blaspheme. So that means he tortured them, which that's kind of new material. He's in his testimony. And since I was so furiously enraged at them, I pursued them even to foreign cities. With this in mind, I was traveling to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests, when at midday along the road, Your Excellency, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining around me and my companions. When we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It hurts you to kick against the goads. I asked, Who are you, Lord? The Lord answered, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up, stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you to serve and testify to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you. I will rescue you from your people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. After that, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, but declared first to those in Damascus, and then in Jerusalem, and throughout the countryside of Judea, and also to the Gentiles, that they should repent and turn to God and do deeds consistent with repentance. For this reason, the Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. To this day I have had help from God, and so I stand here testifying to both small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would take place, that the Messiah must suffer, and that by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim light both to our people and to the Gentiles. While Paul was making this defense, Festus exclaimed, You are out of your mind, Paul. Too much learning is driving you insane. But Paul said, I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I am speaking the sober truth. Indeed, the king knows about these things, and to him I speak freely. For I am certain that none of these things has escaped his notice, for this was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. And Agrippa said to Paul, Are you so quickly persuading me to become a Christian? And Paul replied, Whether quickly or not, I pray to God that not only you, but also all who are listening to me today might become such as I am, except for these chains. All right. So here's the question I want us to hold in our brains. I know that's kind of a long chunk, but this is the question I want us to hold in our brains. Why does Paul get personal here? Why does Paul share his testimony, share his story, share his faith story, his conversion story? Why does he go there? And the question becomes a little bit more significant when we kind of think about the fact that that's not normal for Paul. I mean, we have followed Paul quite a bit through the book of Acts, and he only really does this one other time. I mean, we see the conversion in Acts chapter 9, and in all the times we've seen Paul preach, he has never shared his testimony like this. He has never shared his personal conversion story. He actually does it once before. We didn't look at this, but when that mob broke out in the temple in Jerusalem and he wanted to talk to them, he shared his story right then. He didn't go into as much detail as he does right here, but he shared a little bit of his story then, basically to make the point of, hey, I'm a good, faithful Jew, but God has still called me to go to the Gentiles, which as soon as he did that, they just turned into lunatics, and they were really upset at him for suggesting that God had called him to go to the Gentiles. But nevertheless, this is kind of new territory for Paul to share his story like that. I mean, if you think about it, when Paul preaches back in chapter 13 to the Jews in the synagogue at Antioch, we didn't look at that passage. The main reason we didn't look at it is because it's very similar to what Peter says to the Jews back in Acts chapter 2. But his sermon was kind of what you'd expect. He preaches a sermon to a Jewish people who have these Jewish questions, and so he goes to the Jewish scriptures and explains how Jesus is the fulfillment of those Jewish scriptures. It doesn't say anything about his testimony. when he's in Lystra. And you remember I don't know if you remember, but when he goes there and they mistake him and Barnabas for gods, and they try to worship him, and he said, "Oh, don't worship me." And he has just a real quick few minutes to speak to them, and he appeals to them and says, we're not gods, but we serve a God who cares for you and who provides for you. And he's talking to kind of a rural farming community, so he talks about God being the one who sends the rain and provides the crops, and he speaks to them on terms they can understand, but he says nothing about his own testimony. When he's in Athens, he's speaking to the philosophical intellectual elite. He quotes their philosophers, he quotes their poets, he speaks in Greek philosophical concepts, but he doesn't share his testimony. Other than that time in front of the mob, this is the only time he does that. And it's really the only time where he does it in this kind of detail. And the question is, why does he do that? Why does he share his story? Why does he share the testimony of his conversion, of his faith story? Why does he do that? So hold that thought for a second. Because the other thing we need to think about is, why does he spend so much time talking about the resurrection? I don't know if you picked up on this, but as he is talking to them and explaining to them what's going on in his life and why he's on trial, the thing that he keeps coming back to is he's trying to get them to understand that something different has happened. And so he addresses this issue of the resurrection. He says, the reason I'm here is because of my faith and my belief in the resurrection. And here's the thing. Jewish people back then, other than the Sadducees, they were the chief priests, and they didn't really hold to this belief. But everyone else, especially the Pharisees, and they were the ones that were really the powerful teachers, they held to this belief of the resurrection of the dead. And what they believed was that the Jewish people had received all these promises from God in the Old Testament, and especially in Isaiah and some of these later prophets, and that they had not been fulfilled yet. And so they were waiting on fulfillment. And they believed that there was going to come a day when God was going to send his Messiah, when he was going to turn things upside down, and he was going to establish his righteous kingdom here on earth, drive out the bad guys, put the good guys in power. And at that point, there was going to be this resurrection of the dead, and of the righteous and the unrighteous. And the unrighteous, they were going to go where unrighteous people go when they're resurrected. Okay? And the righteous, when they're resurrected, would then remain on earth. And the Messiah would govern earth as if God was in charge. And that's what and so they had this kind of view of history where up until this point it hadn't happened yet, and there was going to come this point where things would get turned upside down, in the words of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And then things were going to be totally different from that point on, okay? And the resurrection of the dead was going to mark that, okay? And what Paul is saying is that has happened. It just didn't happen the way we thought it was going to happen. That rather than the complete resurrection of the dead marking that new era, instead what has happened is that Jesus was resurrected first. He was the first one to be resurrected from the dead. And that one day he's going to come back, and then there'll be that general resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous. And when that general resurrection happens, this present evil age will end. But with Jesus coming, the age to come has already begun. So rather than this kind of two-stage history, there's kind of this overlap, right? That the new era has begun in Jesus with his resurrection, and the old era hasn't quite ended yet, so there's this overlap, okay? And I know that's kind of a weird concept, but that's what's going on in his brain. But the big point he's trying to get across to Agrippa is, you believe in the resurrection of the dead. Well, that, even though it didn't happen the way we thought it was going to happen, it has started, it has happened now in the person of Jesus. Because when he was resurrected from the dead, that inaugurated this new era in which God would now be having a new relationship with his people and governing his people and leading his people to be the people that he made them to be from the very beginning. That's what he's trying to say. That with that new age has begun. And so when he says that, what he's saying is, I know you, and as he says that, he starts to press Agrippa to own up. Do you believe that? And the reason is because he's basically wanting to say, if you believe the resurrection is true, then this shouldn't be so weird to you. And if this is the case, if it is true that Jesus is raised from the dead, that means this new era has begun. That God wants to deal with his people differently. that God wants to come into a new relationship with his people. And that this new relationship is now available to you. And so, Agrippa, do you believe that? And so he's pushing him for a decision. In essence, what's going on, you know the movie Polar Express? See the movie Polar Express? You know, there's that wonderful scene right at the beginning, you know, when the Polar Express pulls up in front of that little boy's house. And Tom Hanks welcomes him on. He said, the Polar Express, come on, hop on the Polar Express. And basically, it's this train ride to the North Pole to see Santa. Which is not how, I mean, this boy was starting to not believe in Santa anyway. But if he had any belief in Santa, that wasn't it. It wasn't that, hey, I get to ride a train to the North Pole to see Santa. It's he's going to drop off, like, my Xbox, you know, or my PlayStation. And I'll never see him, right? But that's just the way the Santa thing works. And so, basically, the conductor, Tom Hanks, is saying, come on. And he's saying, basically, this might not be what you had planned. This might not be what you had in mind. This might not be what you had expected. But the train's sitting right in front of you. It's here. The opportunity is available. Are you going to hop on board? Are you going to jump on board and go see Santa? And in a sense, that's the decision that he's pressing Agrippa to. This is different than what you had in mind. This is different than what we've been talking about, the way God has chosen to work through Jesus. And yet this new era has begun. And the question is, are you going to choose to believe that and act accordingly and live accordingly? Okay? But here's the thing. Why does Paul push so hard for Agrippa to believe in the resurrection and to make a decision like that? Why does Paul push so hard? Because again, if you think about Paul's style, we don't see Paul do that too much. I mean, Paul can be forthright, but in all the sermons we've seen, and all the things as he's talked to, you don't see him pushing. You see him laying out some things sometimes. Sometimes he's stronger than others. Sometimes he's more gentler than others. But you don't see him trying to close the deal like that, really putting the squeeze on someone to decide. Why does he do that here with Agrippa? And I think the answer is that he does that because he knows Agrippa is compromised. Because he knows that Agrippa is not who he's supposed to be. King Herod Agrippa II was recognized as the king of the Jews by Rome. And so he's the representative, the official political representative of the Jewish people. So technically he's Jewish. And yet he's probably about as far from being Jewish as you can be. According to the history books, he tried to do kind of right by the Jewish people. He would, most of the time, he would try to intervene and try to kind of get things done on their behalf. But at the end of the day, he was politically compromised. He was a puppet of Rome, is what he was. And in fact, a few years later, after this, when the Jews go to war with the Romans, King Herod Agrippa II, the Jewish king, sends 2,000 soldiers, archers and cavalry, to go fight for the Romans. It's like, really? You're like the Jewish king. That seems a little backwards. But he was and they knew it. He was a politically compromised leader. But not only politically compromised, he was morally compromised. Because this guy, one thing that was, according to Josephus, the Jewish historian, it was common knowledge that King Herod Agrippa II had an incestuous relationship with his sister Bernice, the one sitting on the throne next to him. In other words, when they traveled and they only needed to get one room at the Hyatt, and they only needed to get the king-size bed, okay? And this is where everyone goes, ew, okay? Yes, that's his sister, which was somewhat common, unfortunately. It didn't make it right, but they would do that. Royalty would kind of do that a little bit when they were back in the day. But for the Jews, this would have been just horrific to them. This would have been highly offensive to them. And obviously it indicated that this guy is not really a part of what we believe. This guy is not really a part of what we hold to be true. And so Paul's talking to him, and he's talking to a guy that is Jewish in name, and yet he's politically compromised, he's morally compromised. He is not who he's supposed to be. And so Paul starts to squeeze in on him. And the way he starts to push in on him for a decision. And the way he does that is by telling his story, by sharing his testimony, by sharing how he was changed, how coming face to face with the resurrected Jesus turned his life upside down and became a new and different person. And here's the thing. I think one of the reasons why he does that is because, on one hand, while there's so many things different between Agrippa and Paul, even Paul, when he was doing his killing the Jews thing, as someone who was kind of a zealot for God. Even though there's so many differences, I think what Paul probably sees is that he could benefit from my story, because even though we're coming from different places, my story illustrates that when you come face to face with the resurrected Jesus and you choose to believe with that, it costs you something. Because Paul, the picture we get of Paul was not that his life was miserable before he became a Christian. I mean, if you ask Paul at the time, he probably thought, hey, my life's great. I'm a rising star among the Jewish leaders. I mean, this guy, he had enough juice that he got to go to the top Jewish leadership and say, I want permission to go to different cities and persecute these Christians, and they signed off on that. That'd be like me going to Washington, D.C. central office, Washington, D.C., and talking to the director of the Bureau of Prisons, saying, hey, I think this changes need to happen in the prison, and could you write me a memo so like wardens will listen to me and stuff like that. It'd be like, that would never happen. They wouldn't even let me in the front door, But he had that kind of juice. And so he's a young guy, but he was this rising star in the Jewish faith, in the Jewish community. And then you got Herod Agrippa, even though he's compromised, he's got it made. He's got power, he's got money, he's got wealth. He's living in the lap of yes, he's got a sister. I almost said that. I've already grossed people out enough. But yes, he's got a sister. What more does the guy want? Maybe not that. So anyway, he's just living the life that he wants, and yet Paul comes along. Very good. Paul comes along and he tells his story to say, when I came face to face with the resurrected Jesus and realized that this new era has begun and that my life had been going the wrong track, and I signed on with that, it changed my life completely. And in a sense, it wrecked his life. It ruined his life. He had a good thing going, and it wasn't like that anymore. And yet, he gave it all up because he found something that was so much more true, that was so much more right, that was so much more pure, that was so much more what he knew. He knew in a new way a relationship with God, the grace of God, the love of God, the Holy Spirit living inside of him. And so he gave up all of what he had for that. And basically, I think he's telling his story to Agrippa to say, you may be comfortable where you are, but the question is, do you believe this is true? Because if it is, it's going to cost you something, and yet it's so worth it. It's going to turn your life upside down, and yet it's so worth it. In a sense, I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Irresistible Revolution by Shane Claiborne. Shane Claiborne says a similar thing. He tells about how growing up, he said, some people have a testimony where their lives were horrible and then God came and fixed it. He said, mine's backwards. My life was great, and then God came and ruined it. What he says, because he said, I had a comfortable kind of suburban Christian lifestyle. Everything seemed to be going well for me. I had enough money. I was comfortable in my morality. And then all of a sudden, I came face to face with who Jesus was really calling me to be, and I realized I couldn't go back to that comfortable lifestyle. And so it turned his life completely upside down. And in a sense, that's what Paul is saying that happened to him, and that's what he's challenging Agrippa to let happen to him. And he does that by telling his story. He does that by sharing his testimony. So here's a question. What's your story? What's your testimony? What does God want to say through you that he can only say through you, and he can say best through you, better than anyone else, as he wants to minister to certain people in your lives, whether it be in a setting like this, setting bigger than this, or just one-on-one conversations, or groups of 2 or 3 or 5 or 6? What story, what are the things that he has done in your life? What story has he placed in you that he could use your story to communicate truth to someone in a way that he couldn't do through anyone else, because it's something special and unique happening with you? What is your story, and what does he? And do you know your story? And are you ready to share your story? Because I don't know how many people are in here, but there are a lot of sermons and stories sitting in here right now that God would want to use to make a difference in the lives of other people. And that's just if everybody just had one. But most of us, he's done a bunch of different things in different aspects of our lives. So you multiply that by 3, 4, or 5, and all of a sudden there are a lot of sermons, a lot of stories going on here of how he wants to use you to make a difference in the life of someone else, or someone else's. And I don't know who those individuals are, those groups of people are, but he does. And the question is, do you know your story, and are you ready to share it because he has some things he wants to say through you. That he can say best through you if you only let him. This past week at the penitentiary, we had our Life Connections program graduation. It's an 18-month faith-based reentry program. There's only five institutions in the country have it, and our penitentiary is one of them. It's a really neat program, and every 6 months we have a group that graduates. And when they have a graduation, they always bring in a speaker from the outside, a guest speaker. And they brought in this lady for this one, and they're reading off right now she's the senior policy advisor on kind of reentry affairs, and helping inmates reenter into society. And so she's in Washington, D.C. working on that stuff. And they read off kind of her resume, so to speak, to introduce her. And it was just this impressive list of accomplishments. And they get done sharing the movie, they bring her up and we're clapping, she steps up and she says, when I hear all that really sounds like I've done a lot of stuff, and I guess maybe I have, I don't know, but she said the one thing that is not on there that really is that I want to share with you, that is maybe the core, the foundation of my story, of my resume, of those things that have happened in my life, is that I used to be an inmate. So she said, I used to be an inmate. I used to basically sit where, and it was back in the day, but she said, I used to sit where you sit. And she said, and my story, while all those things happened, my story really is a story about me going from the crack house to the White House. And when she said that, every guy in that room locked in. And they were like on the edges of their seats, listening to what she had to say. And I loved it too, but I tell you, about 15 minutes into it, I was probably feeling kind of like what you're feeling right now. It's kind of like, oh my gosh, I got things to do, and I'm tired, and I'm starting to fade. But I glanced around that room, and they were like this. They were just fixed on me, because she was telling a story that they could connect with. And she became a mouthpiece for God to speak to them about things that he wanted to do in their lives. What's your story? What does he want to say through you? What does he want to say through us, to the people in our lives? And are you ready to share that? Because he has some things he wants to say through each of us. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your love and your grace. God, I thank you for your presence in our lives. I thank you that when you do special and significant things in us, that in a way it's new territory. You do so much in all of our lives, but you do something unique and beautiful in each one of us, and you want to use that to make a difference in your world and in your kingdom. God, I pray that you help us to know, to really wrestle with the things that you're doing in our lives, the things you have done in our lives, the things you're doing in our lives now, the ways we are different because of what you've done. And God, I pray that you help us to be ready to share our story with others. I pray that you give us eyes to see those around us who are hurting, or maybe who are compromised, or maybe need to hear what we have to say. And even if it doesn't make sense to us how you might want to use that conversation, God, I pray that you'll help us to trust you when you lead us to share our story with someone else. And God, as you do, we trust you to work in us and through us, and to do what only you can do. Oh, we love you in Jesus' name. Amen. We're going to go into a time of communion. And tonight for communion, we're just going to pass the trays. I'm just going to pat around on the piano over there and play a little bit. And so, take the juice, the bread, take the juice, spend some time praying. When you feel ready on your own, just go ahead and take it. Take the body of Christ that's broken for you and the blood of the new covenant shed for you. Spend some time confessing sin before him. Spend some time just enjoying the relationship you have with him. But I would also encourage you to do this, just as you're in that time of prayer. We haven't really talked about this, and you all may be aware of this, and if so, that's great that you are. But if you're not, David Sprigg, and I asked him this past week, I said, can I share this? We've never really said it from up front. He said, yeah, that's fine. But David, over the last year, has been wrestling on and off with cancer. I didn't know if you all knew that. If you did, I see some head nods. Okay, good. If you didn't, he's not really talked about it a whole lot, and it's not like he's trumpeted it from the rooftops. So, but we want to. I want us to be praying for him and loving on him as he goes through this. To compound that, he was in a car wreck a few weeks ago, and from that car wreck developed some weird condition, and I don't even completely understand it, which is okay because I guess the doctors don't completely understand it. But he was in the hospital last weekend, and they thought they had it knocked out, and we just got a text. He had to go back into the hospital, and having Dave in the hospital is like having a caged animal. I mean, it's just like I feel sorry for the nurses dealing with that restless spirit, trying to get him to sit still and behave. But anyway, but he and Paul and their family could just use our prayers right now. So as you spend time praying to the Father, just remember him in your prayers, and just as you go through your week, remember him in your prayers. And you see him, make sure he knows that you love him and care for him and are praying for him. But let's go ahead and spend some time in communion with the Father. So there are trays over there, a couple trays there, a tray there, and a couple trays there. And if you would go ahead and pass the trays, take the bread and the juice, spend some time with the Father, calling out to him, and then after a bit, our worship team, after you guys get done, just kind of make your way up here, and we'll sing a couple more songs. Okay, and be done. So let's spend some time in communion. week, y'all. Food over there and plenty next to hug. Knock yourselves out.